Alright, welcome back. In this video we're just going to take a quick step back from creating our resources or defining our resources, and we're going to take a look at the Pulumi documentation. So during the last video, when we were creating our initial resources, our resource group and our virtual network, you may have been wondering, well, how do you know what you're creating, or how do you know what options it takes? So in the case of a virtual network, I told you it takes an address space, and you might have been sat there going, well, how do I know that it takes an address space? And the answer to that is the documentation. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is open up a browser. You can see I'm actually already on the documentation here because I've been using it, but you would just head to pulumi.com/registry. And once that loads, you will see a list of the providers that Pulumi supports. And like we talked about before, there are literally hundreds of them. So we've got things like Heroku, Keycloak, Kubernetes, Linode, all the different options you could possibly ever want, really. But we are going to focus on Azure, as we have been for this course. So come up to the top and just click on Azure Native. Now, once you first get into here, it's just going to give you some basic information on what the Azure Native provider is and how to use it. But the main thing we're interested in is this search box over here. So let's say, for example, we wanted to create a virtual machine. First thing we'd do, come over to this box, type in virtual machine, and just from my experience using Azure, I know that a virtual machine falls under compute and then virtual machine. So we'll click into this. Okay, and this is the documentation for a virtual machine. The bit we're mainly interested in to start off with is this bit at the top, which is a list of examples of common inputs that you might want to put into a resource for a virtual machine. So the very first one here is create a Linux VM with a patch setting assessment mode of image default, but we've also got loads of other examples of different configurations that you might want to use. So here we've got one, create a VM with user data. We've got create a VM with hibernation enabled. Create a VM in an availability set. You get the picture. Now if we open one of these up, so I'm just going to pick on create a VM in an availability set, we'll see something that should be familiar by now. We're going to see var virtual machine equals new virtual machine. So our variable and then the object type that we're creating. We're going to give it a name, virtual machine, and they do this slightly differently on the virtual machine one. They just do new open close bracket, whereas we've done new Azure native.compute.virtual machine args, for example. Again, just a style choice. You do whatever is comfortable for you, but you will find potentially that some of the other examples do it the way we've done it, whereas the virtual machine uses this way. And that's just a side effect of plenty of different people in the community having inputs into this documentation. Again, not an issue, just be aware that there are different styles and different ways of declaring these objects. If you're familiar with C#, you're probably already comfortable and know what you're going to do anyway. Okay, and then we can just have a look again, options, availability set, hardware profile, location. So things that we're now familiar with seeing, and we now know what options a virtual machine can take, just based on this example. However, if we scroll down a little bit further, we can also just get a full list of everything that it accepts, along with a little bit of a description. So as we talked about in the last video, resource group name is required for Azure resources. So we need to provide a resource group name, but then all of these options is entirely up to you how you provide them or which ones that you provide. Obviously, in some instances with different resources, there are going to be some different required ones, but again, entirely up to you. And that's our little whistle-stop tour of the documentation complete. Now with that, I do have a challenge for you, and it's going to involve our virtual network from our last video. So using documentation, and I will give you a clue, virtual network falls under network. So network and then virtual network. And again, all the examples are at the top here. Now we do need to give our virtual network a subnet. In the last video, we gave it an address space and an address prefix, but now we need to give it a subnet. So using documentation, give your virtual network a subnet, and we'll come back together in the next video and look at the solution and how we'd actually do that. All right, I'll see you there.